Welcome everyone to the first session of the Corporate University Directors course. And the topic of today's session is Audit, Strategy, and Budgeting. This is what we'll be discussing today. Why is this necessary? Only those who know how to influence business are worthy of high compensation, and therefore it's very important that the corporate university is not just an event organizer, but a true partner for the business. In other words, for the university to solve business challenges. To achieve this, it's necessary to structure all processes in the university so that they are clearly oriented towards business goals. The website for this course looks like this, with CU Corporate University at the end. For those who don't know me, my name is Mike Pritula. I started working in training back at Alpha Bank and have been involved in training one way or another ever since. And as you know, I also regularly conduct webinars at the Academy. Moving on, we rely on global best practices in our work. There are many of them here. From the perspective of a corporate university. For those interested in trends and development, I recommend paying attention to this association, reading their research, news, and any publications. I would appreciate if you could also write a bit about yourself in the chat, your city, position, and company. While you are writing, I will continue, and once you have written, I will read it out. So those who are already on the course will have a traditional homework assignment, which will allow you to get a diploma, and you will be able to add this diploma to your LinkedIn profile. I wrote instructions on Headhunter today on how to add this diploma, so it's very convenient. So Pavel wrote, Chisinau, Moldova, Global Director. I am not sure how to pronounce it correctly, Nina Group of Companies. Thank you. The course program consists of 10 sessions. We really cover all the most important and necessary topics. Working with trainers, recruitment and training is the second session. What is a corporate university without training? Interaction with business is the third. Instructional design, and the model of effective learning. Here we will discuss that learning doesn't end with training, but that preparation, support, follow-up, evaluation, and so on are important. In the fifth session, we will talk about how employee training programs are traditionally developed. We dedicate the sixth session to coaching and facilitation. The seventh is how to build career management. Essentially, we'll cover the basics of talent management here. In the eighth session, we'll discuss the competency model, an extremely important tool for work and employee evaluation. The ninth is about working with external providers, ensuring they're as good as your own trainers. And in the 10th session, of course, distance learning. This way, we'll cover all the main aspects of corporate university operations. Okay, I'll read another introduction. Azod, ACFA Group Company, Director of Corporate University, Tashkent, Uzbekistan. Great, thanks. And Eleonora Karaganda, Kazakhstan, Head of Learning and Development for Armenia, Georgia, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and PM, covering several countries. Cool, that's great. I'm glad to see that so many specialized professionals have joined us for this session today. Today's session is dedicated to the following topics. We'll discuss what a corporate university is, why businesses need it, and why HR needs it. What should be the competency model for corporate university employees? That is what they should understand. How to audit the current corporate university, how to develop a strategy, how to budget. These are the topics we'll cover with you today. So, the corporate university. George Burson described the work of a corporate university very well. The original slide looks like this. This is his framework that he published, which he called the Enterprise Learning Framework. Essentially, it's a model of corporate learning in a company. It has been translated into Russian. As you know, Russian has more letters in its alphabet and longer words. So what was concise in the original became a bit more expansive in translation. There's a lot he talks about here. Training programs, approaches, disciplines, technological tools, and culture itself. All of these are elements of the learning architecture and are closely tied to the business. In this course for corporate university directors, we try to cover this model as comprehensively as possible to provide all the tools, all the understanding, everything possible for the operation of a corporate university. So, if you're already involved with a corporate university, you can check if you've covered all of this. If you know all of this, if you know how it works or not, this is the model we're looking at. So, a corporate university is a model of organizing learning within an organization that functions as a somewhat independent entity. So what is an organization? It's a group of people working together to solve problems. What tasks do corporate universities solve? We'll discuss it today, and we'll talk about it throughout the course. Because expectations for a corporate university are higher than just training or what's expected from a training manager, any company views a corporate university as something very important and serious. And consequently, these expectations need to be met. Okay, let's move on. This is how it works. A corporate university in any company, of course, doesn't exist in isolation. A modern corporate university isn't just another part of the human resources function, it's a strategic tool for any company. And there are companies that are even starting to make the corporate university a separate division, meaning they might not even be under human resources. Consequently, several factors influence the learning and development strategy. It's the external environment in which the company operates. We'll talk about that today. Well, simply put, technology. Technology has been significantly transforming the corporate learning system in recent years. Then it's not technology, but the pandemic. For example, the pandemic, which doesn't directly but indirectly prohibits offline learning, large gatherings of people in enclosed spaces violate quarantine rules. That's why you need to be aware of the external environment. Next is the internal environment. The corporate university exists within the company's business conditions, which affect it. And the company's strategy is where the company wants to go. Based on this, the learning and development strategy is born. Next comes the needs analysis, the design of the complete learning experience, or what's called instructional design, the development plan, and the evaluation of results. That's a brief overview of how it ties into the company's strategy. Moreover, every corporate university has an internal environment, the organization in which it exists. In an industrial organization, it will operate one way, while in an information technology organization, the university will function a bit differently. Then there are the tasks performed in the company. In some places it's sales, in others it's production, logistics, or information technology product development. Different types of people work in different companies too. Accordingly, the corporate university is attuned differently to them. In some places it's very young staff, in others it's blue-collar workers, in some only white-collar, in others information technology specialists, and in some top managers. And then there's society. That is what people represent, what they embody as a group. This is the internal environment. In terms of analyzing both the external and internal environment, there are business tools that allow the corporate university to constantly take into account everything happening inside and outside. One of the most popular tools is the pestle analysis, which any company planning its strategy should complete. Any corporate university director, when developing a corporate university strategy, should also complete it. The acronym describes 6 main areas that should be analyzed. These are politics, economics, society, technology, environment, and legislation. All of this affects the company, all of this affects human resources, and of course the corporate university. Accordingly, what's happening around us now should be reflected in the corporate university. It's necessary to explicitly state when a new technology appears. For example, last year chatbots were very popular. Consequently, the corporate university director should consider, is it appropriate for the company to use chatbots for employee training right now? Maybe yes, maybe no, but it's worth analyzing. And it's the same everywhere. Take the quarantine, for instance. It affects society, it affects the company. It complicates offline meetings, large employee gatherings. So either you gather together while maintaining a large distance, or you move everything online like this. There are many such nuances. And of course, every country has its own nuances specific to that country. All of this needs to be taken into account. Let's move on. So, the corporate university is strongly influenced by how the company manages people overall, as capital, as its assets. And here it's important to consider the overall approach to people management. And it's important to apply the corporate university's approach as one of the tools for human capital management. Human capital, as scary as it might sound, is similar to talking about people and resources. Nevertheless, it's a fact. From a business perspective, business is often a cold and rational science. From a business perspective, a business has capital, assets, and liabilities. There are business processes, the goal of making money, and so on. And the business is interested in multiplying and growing the capital it has. Accordingly, the corporate university is one of the tools for improving human capital. Through a corporate university, a company can strengthen its competitive position. Therefore, it's important to view the work of the corporate university not just as an organization working with individual employees, but also as a business function that increases the value of human capital in the company, and to look at what affects the work of the corporate university and how, in turn, the corporate university can influence the business. Accordingly, each company has its own business strategy, which can vary. Consequently, this creates different content for the corporate university. The corporate university, in turn, knowing where the business is heading, can plan its activities. And being such a strategic tool, a business tool can rely on various data that the corporate university aims to manage. Accordingly, depending on where the business is going and what's happening, the data will be different. Overall, the corporate university, being itself a kind of organization within an organization like an external organization or a business organization, must rely on data to make decisions, to develop, to report to the business to ensure its effectiveness. If the corporate university doesn't work with any data, sooner or later the business will be tempted. Tempted to do what? To reduce the budget of the corporate university. If the business doesn't see value in it, it will cut back, which will indirectly worsen the business's position as well. And conversely, if the business sees results. But if the director of the corporate university, based on properly selected data, can prove to the business that the corporate university is truly useful, then on the contrary, additional investments can be expected, which in the long term, again, will be beneficial for the business. Accordingly, working with the corporate university strategy, synchronizing it with the business strategy, the director of the corporate university plans their activities and identifies the indicators they aim to improve. So my first question to you today is, tell me, is there a corporate university in operation, or whatever you call it in your company? It could be a training department, or it could be a training function. Do you have any data that you want to influence and are striving to influence? And you track them, knowing that these are the data, these numbers, these metrics, these indicators that you want to improve. If you have this, put a plus. If not, put a minus. Okay, I see one plus. These data, by the way, can come from various sources. Yes, there are several here, but data about human resources processes, about the effectiveness of the human resources function, data from surveys, some level of engagement, data on business performance, on employee efficiency, and so on. Plus, plus. Okay. All right, let's move on. Accordingly, a company that has a certain strategy and strives to implement it will have a human resources department that has its own human resources strategy, which the human resources department aims to implement. And accordingly, the corporate university will have its own strategy, or more precisely, a corporate university strategy, which it aims to implement. And this strategy will largely align with how the company manages human capital. Here are several possible objectives that can be taken as goals for a corporate university. They will overlap with human resources goals, which is normal, because the function of employee training and development is one of the functions that the company deals with. More precisely, the human resources department. Next, the indicators, so the human resources department can work with different metrics and use them in various ways for performance analysis, planning, goal setting, and utilize these indicators differently. The same applies to the corporate university. Since the corporate university is not isolated, it can choose the same indicators for itself and can also influence them. The influence will just be through the tools that are available to the corporate university. This includes employee development, performance improvement, and employee evaluation. Of course, the corporate university won't be involved in, for example, recruiting or employee retention, but it will even have an indirect influence there. What kind of influence? For example, when the company interviews candidates, if the company tells the candidate about the existence of a corporate university, describes development programs, events, and other activities, this enhances the company's image in the eyes of the candidate and makes the company more attractive. Thus, the corporate university indirectly influences functions that are not directly related to it. Here are some of these indicators, and here are different ways to use them. While we are getting familiar with this part, we will move on to more practical things next and understand how to implement this. Now let us talk about why it is needed for business. So, the main task of a corporate university is to manage human capital, increasing its value and significance, and thereby influencing business results through improved employee performance. Therefore, a corporate university that operates at such a strategic level thoroughly analyzes the company's training needs, starting with business needs, beginning with the analysis of business effectiveness, and then cascading down to lower levels. They analyze at the individual employee level what it means to be effective for this particular employee. Thus, it can be said that a corporate university, when it is built correctly, is not so much about learning and development as it is about improving efficiency. That is why the corporate university is often responsible for such a function as management in the company, because traditionally this function is more of an HR responsibility, but when a corporate university is established and developed sooner or later, this function gradually shifts to it. In other words, it becomes responsible for setting appropriate employee goals. It is responsible for providing regular feedback to employees and for coaching them. It is also responsible for the final evaluation of employees and for developing ways to further improve employee performance through development plans, various programs, and so on. Let us move on. So, let us look at how a corporate university operates. One of the current models is what is now called the 6 disciplines model. Previously, a different model was popular. Today, that model is considered somewhat outdated. The ADDIE model used to be popular. You might not have heard of it. It is spelled ADDIE. The ADDIE model was specifically a model for instructional design or complete learning experience design. The ADDIE model covered 5 components, and it is now being replaced in modern practices by the 6D model. In English, it is called 6 disciplines, which in Russian translates to the model of 6 disciplines, which states that modern corporate learning is built on diagnosis, then learning design, conducting training, transferring learning to practice, ongoing support and follow-up, and evaluation of results. This is the modern model. Each stage has its own sub-processes. In the instructional design class, we'll study this model in more detail, examining what it consists of and how to properly organize everything. Today we're getting a general overview to understand how modern corporate training is structured. Moving on, another important part of modern learning that must be considered by a corporate university is the model known as 70-20-10. It's very popular. It's talked about a lot, but few people remember where it actually came from. Well, it was Lombardo and Eichinger, 2 people who formulated the model after studying the work of successful executives. When they studied successful leaders, they were interested in where these leaders learned to lead so well. And it turned out that successful leaders, successful managers, gained 70% of their knowledge through on-the-job experience, 20% by interacting with others, and only 10% as a result of taking courses. There you have it. Therefore, modern learning is built not only on courses, but also necessarily on communication with other people, and definitely on proper work planning and support during work. In other words, modern learning doesn't just cover the model of these 10% consisting of trainings, courses, and books, for example. It takes a broader view of learning. Next, as I've said before, the ultimate goal of any corporate university is to increase efficiency. That is, if we look at a corporate university through the eyes of business and ask why a company needs a corporate university, the most important answer will be to improve business efficiency. If a corporate university doesn't improve business efficiency, it's an incomplete corporate university. It's just a department organizing training. Therefore, improving business efficiency is the main goal of a corporate university. At the same time, of course, it's important to understand that many factors affect an employee's effectiveness, so we can't say it's 100% responsible, but nevertheless, the contribution of the corporate university is enormous. It's important to distinguish what affects an employee's effectiveness and whether a corporate university can help improve efficiency in a given situation. It often happens that a company has a problem that doesn't lie in the area of knowledge, skills, abilities of employees, but a problem that the company is trying to solve specifically through training. This problem is, a kind of sweeping the issue under the rug and an attempt to somehow mask it and pretend that we're doing something about it. How can we determine that training and a corporate university are not the best solution for a current problem? A very simple question can help us here. If we're talking about some employees not working very efficiently, ask the question, could they work better if their lives depended on it? If we answer yes, then most likely the issue isn't about knowledge. It could be a motivation problem, an interaction problem, or an issue with management. If the answer is no, then yes, training might be able to help in this case. Next, a corporate university is responsible for more than just fulfilling requests. There is a misconception that a corporate university is a department where people sit who know how to receive training requests, select good providers, organize training, and report back. But that is not the case because training is not the only responsibility of a corporate university. Training alone is not enough to make people work more effectively after the training. What is much more important is the transfer of learning to practice. In other words, it is much more important to achieve a situation where an employee answers yes when asked if they can perform their job in a new way. And to the second question, will I perform the job in a new way? They also answer yes. Training typically solves the first task. It allows a person to answer the question, yes, I can, I now know, but often does not address the answer to the second situation question, but will I? So it is a question of motivation, and an effective corporate university, it does everything necessary to ensure that employees actually apply what they have learned in practice. Let us move on. What is the difference between the new 6D model and the classic ADDIE model, although there were also other models like SAM and Agile? The difference is that the classic models, from the perspective of the 6D model, only covered 3 stages, while the corporate university covers more than 6 stages. That is, it is a more extended model. Consequently, a corporate university in any company should be profitable and should provide results that exceed the costs. Otherwise, there is no point in having it. If the benefits of training do not exceed the costs, then such training is very questionable. Therefore, companies, modern companies, especially for the most costly training items, calculate the return on investment. They find value in this or that training, quantify this value and understand, okay, this was useful or this was not useful. Even a modern corporate university has many different requests, many different ideas and projects, and they find those projects that have the highest ROI and focus on these projects first and foremost. In other words, a modern corporate university director is a bit like an investment manager who has a portfolio of projects that are constantly being analyzed to determine where to invest time, resources, effort, and energy to ensure maximum return for the company. There are different ways to calculate the benefits. Here are some examples of what the indicators might be and how they can be roughly calculated. So my next question to you is, tell me please, do you calculate the benefits of the training that your company conducts? If you do, put a plus sign. If you don't, put a minus sign. Okay, I see one plus. Cool. Great. Plus. Excellent. It is really great to hear that. Next, it is very important that training is not just in the format of, we are really great at fulfilling requests. The manager came, we executed this request brilliantly. The manager left satisfied. It is very important that training is always purposeful and effective. Therefore, one of the main questions that needs to be asked is why we are conducting this or that training. So when a manager comes to the director of the corporate university, should the question why be asked? It should not sound rude, it should sound professional with the right approach. But indeed, it should help define the business goals we want to achieve through training. Accordingly, when working with a client, the corporate university director or the person in charge always identifies the business goals we will be influencing. Let us move on. How do we define business outcomes? Of course, it is not the university director who decides this, but the business leader who requests the training helps determine it. From a learning diagnostics perspective, there are 4 main questions that help clearly articulate what we expect from the training. These are: what business needs will be met, what employees will do differently or more effectively, how and who will be able to confirm the achievement of these goals, and what are all the criteria for the program's success. Often then, to evaluate effectiveness, the Kirkpatrick model is used, a 4-level effectiveness evaluation model. We will talk more about this later. But here, I am showing you an example. Tell me, here's the next question for you. Do you use the Kirkpatrick model in your work or not? Plus, plus, minus. Here will be an example of a survey on the screen. Okay, so it's worth thinking about. Now, why do we need a corporate university with other HR functions, and how do they intersect? The fact is that the corporate university intersects very closely with all functions, from job analysis to recruiting, performance evaluation, compensation, automation, and so on. So it's an extremely close collaboration. Those corporate university directors who want to completely isolate themselves are wrong. Even if the corporate university is not subordinate to HR, if it has been given such a high status that the corporate university director reports directly to the CEO, they still need to work with HR, like the left and right hands working together. I don't know if anyone has a situation in their company where you're outside of HR, where the corporate university is a separate business function. If anyone has this situation, please write about it. Now, about the employee competency model. Oh, you have it. That's interesting. Yes, you see. It's unusual, but it exists. Yeah, not cool. Well, it means something's not organized properly. But often there's an issue of power struggles and status. I'll explain now why this is interesting, because when a corporate university is under the CEO, it brings more status and significance. That is, if the company emphasizes that it's important. But if it creates conflicts with HR, if it doesn't allow for full integration, then of course it's not cool. So there's a problem that needs to be solved. The same applies to, for example, HR and finance. They should work very closely together. Lots of problems. Yes, there might be a problem with understanding between HR and the corporate university director. Why is this and what is it? I mean, you need to work on it. You need to work on establishing relationships. It's difficult to work separately from HR. Then you need to build relationships. So, the company has structured something incorrectly somewhere. Interesting, yes. Although I expected differently, that it should be good instead. That is, it's effective with high status, but apparently some ambitions or internal issues prevent it from being realized. I see. Let's move on. The competency model for a modern corporate university employee and the corporate university director. There's an organization in the world, I mentioned it at the beginning of the class, the Association for Talent Development. Association for Talent Development, which was formerly called ASTD, has been developing a competency model for many years. This competency model is found in many books about training and employee development. It describes areas of responsibility and competencies in the field of training and fundamental competencies. I translated this model into Russian. I won't go through each point in detail, I'll cover it generally. One of the most important competencies, which I mentioned at the beginning today, is improving effectiveness. Indeed, once again, corporate training, like all training in a company, is needed to improve effectiveness. The second is design according to instructions, or instructional design. Instructional design is very difficult to translate into Russian. Essentially, it's a complete learning experience, or it's a view of learning as a broader set of activities than just training. No one has really translated this term properly into Russian. Some people translate it as pedagogical design, but pedagogy is about teaching children. Then it would be more correct to say andragogical design or methodology. Well, in general, it's a term that's been translated in various ways. It's an approach where we look at learning from a 360-degree perspective, Preparation, training, support, guidance, evaluation, practical application, manager involvement, and so on. Next, the actual training itself, meaning the delivery or organization of the training. There are also many nuances there. Then, knowledge of educational technologies. And this is especially important now because technologies are developing rapidly. Every year, a huge number of startups emerge in the field of learning, various testing platforms for personal development plans, gamification platforms, content hosting platforms, and so on. There are a lot of them. Every year, a large number of people write about how they have just appeared and ask to be advertised immediately. But I am always cautious. I prefer to wait and see how long a company has been around before considering them seriously. Next, evaluating the impact of training is extremely important. Otherwise, the business simply will not want to repeat it and will not want to invest money. Next is curriculum management. It is like managing a portfolio of projects. It is also important to approach it this way. That is, not just create and develop once and then implement them. Next is integrated talent management, which means integrating with other human resources activities and ensuring that learning does not exist in isolation. Coaching, which is really cutting edge. Although coaching has been around for many years, it is now a super modern technique for people development because it is the most versatile and engages people the most. Next, knowledge management, which, by the way, Deloitte included in last year's top trends, because many companies are in the knowledge business. Any business is a knowledge business. Because any of these companies now do not have an office, they are working remotely. Not equipment, because laptops often belong to people now. These policies, bring your own device, are popular. Unless the company has servers that it owns, that is probably all that companies copy to code. Everything else is people and their knowledge. Therefore, it is very important to manage knowledge. Next, change management. It is very important, not even ABC. Oh, well, I meant rented servers. You are right. Yes, that is what I meant. Yes, I know about Amazon Web Services. Recently, by the way, a huge data storage facility burned down in Germany. A terrible story in Frankfurt. Well, yes. So they have these rented servers, cloud-based, where their photos are stored, and everything else. Change management. Change management is about impacting the business, because often it's not enough to train. It's important to ensure that knowledge is applied. These are the professional and fundamental competencies that are important for employees involved in training, and of course for the director of a corporate university. It's about understanding the business, and quite deeply at that. That's why very often people in training come from business backgrounds. I probably haven't seen so many people from business transitioning from sales or other functions in any other area as much as in training. Here's a question for you. Is there anyone among you who came from business or another function? Plus. Well, there you go, because this is very important. An acquaintance of mine, a former colleague who has worked in business for decades, is now being invited into training because experience is extremely important, because she understands the business from the inside. Next, global thinking, but this primarily refers to international companies, where there are global teams, different cultures, and so on. There are questions about diversity. Then there's industry understanding, meaning comprehension of your specific industry, what's happening there, its nuances, innovations, trends, and so on. Then there are interpersonal skills. You see, for working with HR, it's crucial to have someone on the HR side with this set of competencies. Next are personal skills and, of course, familiarity with or understanding of technology. Because training is heavily shifting towards technology, with many different technologies emerging, various solutions for learning, talent management, and assessment. You need to familiarize yourself with them, use them, because they simplify, accelerate, improve, and so on. That's what's required. Now let's talk about audit and strategy. So, to conduct an audit of the corporate university's operations, you'll have a checklist available via the link here. If you've ever watched the webinars of the HRR Formula course, there's a complete checklist for the entire HR audit in a company. From the corporate university perspective, I've narrowed it down to only those questions directly related to employee training and development. But believe me, there are still many points that can be evaluated. The checklist works on the principle that you look at all possible items and check whether the company has them or not. You mark yes or no. If it's present, you mark yes. If not, you mark no. And you understand where there's room for development. And regarding strategy, there are 2 strategy tabs in the checklist because, as I'll say, HR strategy is in many ways similar to business strategy. That is, the development scheme, sequence of actions, and sections overlap in many ways. And the strategy of a corporate university, since it's closely aligned with HR, is also very similar to HR strategy in many ways. You'll have a strategy template with section guidelines. There will be some examples of how to fill these sections and instructions on what needs to be included. Now I'll explain how to budget. Budgeting is probably the most interesting thing because it's about money, sometimes very serious money. And here you need to understand how to approach it. First, there are global statistics on training expenses. Globally, it's $1,300 per person. 2018 is the most recent year I was able to find in an open format. All other data comes at a cost. That is, you need to pay $1,000 for the latest report. What's most interesting is how we can rely on expense information. It's known that companies spend about 3% of an employee's salary on training. That's why we're talking about different organizations. Actually, I had a breakdown by industries, different cross-sections, but I simplified it. If you're interested in a specific industry, write in the chat. I've shared the report. The last published ATD was for 2015. All the others are sold for a fee, unfortunately. But overall, these are all companies. There are differences. For example, IT and consulting are higher, manufacturing is lower, management is a bit higher, so these variations exist. I would say variations of plus or minus 20 to 30%. Well, not so much that it's multiples, where some spend $1,000 and others $5,000. That is, someone might spend $1,500, someone else might spend $800 to $900. It's very good to look at it in relation to the employee's salary, because store clerks earn less and their training costs are lower. IT staff or top consultants earn more and the costs for them are higher. Therefore, we take it as a percentage of annual salary for everyone. This is the best indicator for us of the annual budget. Next, where does this money go? Internal costs are approximately the global average. Internal costs are 60%, external providers 30%, tuition reimbursement 15%. This is reimbursement. When an employee goes, succeeds, brings us something, and we compensate them partially or fully. Next, the average number of training hours per employee per year. By the way, these figures correlate with the companies where I work. It's more like a percentage because in some places salaries were higher, so it was closer. In other places salaries were lower, so this figure was of course very large. This is also the case. The average number of training hours we had was also about that much, 30 to 40 hours. This takes into account all types of training per employee per year. That's roughly what companies spend. There's no data on teaching methods for last year. I think that over the past year, traditional classroom learning has significantly decreased due to quarantine. But even before that, the trend was a gradual increase in the share of online learning and a reduction in traditional methods. Employees, how many employees per training specialist? It's about 300 people. So 1 to 300 is the ratio. That is, if you have 1,000 people in your company, then it's 3 people. If it's 10,000, then it's 30 people. This is the average, the overall average. Next, what do they teach? This is the direction of company training and the proportion of how many companies provide training. Distribution of training by direction, management training, then professional training, mandatory training like safety training, and so on in descending order. You can also check yourself, see how much you have as well. Maybe you forgot to train your managers or something else that you're not taking into account. The sole reason for the existence of the learning function is to contribute to achieving business results. So when budgeting for training, always think about how much you're impacting business results. What are the options for budgeting training? The simplest is a percentage of the payroll or a budget per employee. For example, 3% of the payroll would be the cost for the corporate university. Or it could be $1,000 per employee multiplied by the number of people in the company. That's the budget. A bit more complex is basing it on department requests, meaning you collect and calculate requests, but this isn't quite accurate in terms of effective learning or its traditional budgeting for the corporate university as an organization, where we take fixed internal costs, variable internal costs, and external costs, or more flexible methods, where we calculate the return on investment for each training every time. This is the most complex process. In essence, there's no fixed budget as such. Requests come in, and if the ROI is positive, the company invests money. What's included? In fact, a lot can be included in the training budget. And assessment, for example, 360-degree feedback with some external providers or assessment. The training itself includes all types of coaching, conferences, business trips, tuition reimbursement, leadership programs, internal trainers, English, learning management system type systems. All these various things can be included. This is a kind of universal set. Each company might include something else here. Assessment is an example of what can be included in evaluation: talent assessment, aptitude, personality traits, job fit, assessment center. Here I have listed examples of providers that offer these services. Training can be offline, online, with in-house trainers. Coaching can be internal, external, or executive training. But, by the way, I can say that companies that have a corporate university, they start with higher costs for training people and gradually reduce them because they replace external training with internal resources. Everything that was external. Conferences, cost of travel tickets and accommodation, business trips, accommodation tickets, per diems, because often trainers can travel, employees can travel for training if the company has many locations. Compensation for Master of Business Administration, certifications, leadership programs, association memberships can be included. Leadership programs like Stanford Executive Education for the executive team. Internal trainers here, of course, should be considered, both permanent trainers and fees to internal employees who can also act as internal trainers who train other employees. English, if the company needs it, if English is offered as a benefit. It is not exactly training, it is not a business need. Sometimes English is offered as a way to improve efficiency. In that case, it is fine, we budget for all of that. And then there are systems like learning management system, where content is uploaded, training events are held, employees are tested, complete homework, and so on, which also require budgeting. Now for the homework. For those taking the course on conducting an audit of a corporate university, I have shortened it everywhere to corporate university, to avoid repeating this long phrase. So, if you see corporate university, it means corporate university. The first homework assignment is to simply conduct an audit using the checklist that will be provided here via a link and see what you already have and what you do not have. I will repeat, this checklist is part of the larger checklist for the entire human resources audit in the company. It is just a part of it. If you have any questions about the checklist or if something does not work as you expected, please write to me. Of course, I will provide technical support, so feel free to reach out. What's next? With this, the first session is coming to an end. Next, we'll talk about how to work with trainers, how to select and train them, and in general, we'll cover both external trainers and, of course, internal trainers. So not just external ones. And then we'll go through all the other sessions. With this, today's session is coming to an end. If you have any questions, please write. If there are no questions, write down what was most useful for you today, what you're taking away from this, what you're leaving with. I'm glad I got confirmation of approach 6. Oh, I completely forgot about training support. I'll go explain why we need to be friends. Cool. Yes, it's important to remind them that being friendly is necessary. And approximate budgeting for training. Great. Taking this opportunity, I invite everyone who's not yet in the course to take the training to master all the tools and knowledge in this area to the fullest extent. And for those who are already in the course, I'll be happy to meet with you 9 more times. So I'm looking forward to your homework and see you in a week. Have a good evening. Bye-bye. Thank you too.